What is up? I'm Spear, I'm here with Reasonistas, and today we'll be using Expanse to create a juicy dubstep growl, which sounds something like this. And with a little context. So recently Expanse got an update to version 1.1, and I'll be using this tutorial to go over a couple of the fresh features that were introduced in that version. But before getting into that, let me just quickly point out that I got the opportunity to contribute a couple of patches to that update. So if you look into the rec extension Expanse folder, and if you just go, for example, into the base folder right here and search SP, you'll find a couple of the patches that I made. And of course, there are a couple more in the other categories as well. So make sure you check them out if you have Expanse and let me know what you think. Alright, but now let's get into recreating this growl. So first up, we'll chuck in a new Expanse. And because we're building a bass, I'll bring down the polyphony to 1, and I'll also bring up the bend to 12, so a full octave. And next up, we'll set up our amp envelope, and I will get rid of the attack, I'll bring up the sustain all the way, and I'll get rid of the release as well. But I'll just quickly reintroduce a couple of milliseconds of attack, just so that we don't get a clicky kind of start to our growl. Alright, on the oscillator, we'll choose one of the fresh wavetables that were introduced in version 1.1. I believe 16 new wavetables are now available, and we'll use the X-Table Spectral for this bass. And because we're building a bass, I'll bring down the octave to -2. And just from this, you can already kind of tell where we're going with the bass patch, because we have a very nice wavetable here, which already supplies a great sound. But we'll take it even further using the modulation section right here, and we'll bring the first mod all the way up to Sine, which is one of the 3 new mods that were introduced in 1.1, and it's a real blast. Let's check it out. So as you can hear, we get a very nice kind of aggressive tone out of this wavetable with this modulator right here. But it's less obnoxious, I would say, as frequency modulation, which we can just quickly A/B right here. If we were to use FM, at least on this wavetable, it sounds, well, just kind of over the top. But using the sine wavetable, we just get a very nice and raw, gritty texture. The sine modulation algorithm, that is. We'll actually just set up a mod envelope right away so that this is always dynamically changing when we hit a note. So we'll select mod envelope 1 in our mod matrix. We'll make sure that the unipolar button is checked. And then we'll use another feature that was introduced in the recent update, which is drag and drop assignment of modulation destinations. We saw that already in the Parsec 2 update, and it's just very handy, and it just really quickens up the workflow when designing these sounds. So now that we have routed the modenv1 to our first mod on oscillator 1, we'll bring up the amount to about 68. And I'll also do some changes to the mod envelope so that we have like a steady decay going. So we'll start all the way at the top. Then we'll have about 900 milliseconds of decay with a slight curve. And we'll bring this sustain all the way down and have a little kind of fade out here where the decline is a little less pronounced. And already the basis is set for our bass texture. Next up, we'll use the second mod, and we'll bring it up to a high pass mod, which just gets rid of some of the mud that we already introduced by selecting this wavetable and modulating it with the sine. It just already cleans the signal up a little bit, and that'll make it a lot smoother when we then later distort it and all that good stuff. Let me just bring up the volume a little bit so you can hear those kind of steps a little better. Last but not least, we'll also use the third modifier, and we'll bring that one up to phase distortion. Now, if we listen to the sound right now, it's kind of harsh. And I found that phase distortion can really help in this situation to smoothen out the high end a little bit. I'll just bring it up to about 30%. And as you can hear, it takes some of the edge away, but the edge was very, very pronounced beforehand, and now I think it sounds a bit better. Alright, now that all this is set up, we can move on to the filter section, and we'll switch the filter type, which we can now do with a nice and handy drop-down menu, to ladder notch, which lets us carve out some of those middle frequencies that are already a little bit annoying. So I'll set the frequency at 2310 Hz, and then I'll use mod envelope 2 by switching the envelope box right here, because mod envelope 1 is already in use. And we want a slightly different mod envelope to modulate the notch. So we'll select mod envelope 2 and bring the env amount down to minus 46% or something around that. Now let's set up mod envelope 2 to control the notch on this filter. So we'll bring up the attack time to about 300 milliseconds, and we'll bring the T2 to about 900 milliseconds and bring down the sustain all the way. So we have a nice kind of attack decay going right here. And we can curve the decay a little bit so it's more of a smooth kind of, or it's more pronounced on the top and then gets quickly faded out. So as you can hear, as I bring the envelope amount down, we carve out some of those middle frequencies, creating some motion in the bass, but also cleaning up the spectrum a little bit, because when we later distort those frequencies in the middle, will probably kinda hurt. So at about 50 or minus 50%, that is, we have a nice kind of notch modulation right here. So moving on, I want to do a last step before going into the effects section. I want to create a little bit more of diversity in this sound, so I'm going to use the second row in the mod matrix, make sure I select unipolar, and then grab a random source. That means every time we hit a note, we get a different value, and we'll route this random value to the position on our wavetable. Now, I'm doing this because having the sine wave modifier and all the other stuff going, we already have a lot of kind of motion and a lot of action going on in the sound in general. So using an LFO here to modulate the position would be a little bit of overkill, I think. But using a random source, which changes every time we hit a note, will make sure that these longer sections in a potential drop that you're gonna build will still be very diverse, because every time a new growl comes, it'll be slightly different, because we'll now bring up the amount on this random to about 75%. Alright, and now that this is all done, we can move on and slap some effects on this. First up, we'll use the EQ, and we'll just get rid of a lot of the highs. So as you probably noticed during all this, we just stacked up on high frequencies, and we can check that out in the spectrum as well. We got almost a completely uniform distribution of frequencies right here, and we want the highs to be a little lower. So we'll just slash the highs, bring them down to about minus 18 dB, and the frequency is about 4000 Hertz, or 4,500. And we'll also get rid of some of the mud in the middle at about 600 Hertz. We'll just use the mid frequency, and we'll bring down the mid gain to about minus 14 dB. Sorry. And last but not least, we'll also reduce some of the very lows, because you would probably want a sub bass to go under this. We won't cover this in that tutorial, but it's always a good idea to carve out the very lows of a distorted bass and replace them with a proper sub. Alright, let's take a listen. So as you can hear from all this carving, our signal is very thin. So we'll use a compressor to first up gain, add a lot of gain to the signal to bring it back up, but also compress it a little bit. We can reduce the attack time so it's similar to our amp attack. So we just squash the signal so all this notch automation doesn't change the overall volume. Right. Next up, distortion. We'll bring the mode up to hard clip. We'll have the amount at about 1/3, so 33%. And let's take a listen. You can hear that the hard clip really adds that edge that we took off with the phase distortion and some of the EQ. It just gives that edge back, but in a bit more of a controlled fashion. Alright, let's move on. Last step, we'll turn on the reverb and just really dial it down, so no load time, very low mid time, about 0.8 seconds. We can bring down the X over a little bit, so we have some more reverb in the middle. And we can just bring the damp down so the highest frequencies don't get as much reverb. So about 4K hertz is fine, and we'll also reduce the mix. This reverb on this bass is really just to add this illusion of room. It's not there to draw attention or anything. But I'd say we have a pretty nice growl going, so let's automate the pitch bend wheel and jump into the sequencer and see how it holds up in this little example right here. And of course I forgot to route it to the ducking bus. There you go. So after all, we should have gotten pretty similar results than what we had before. And it's just a very nice kind of in-your-face sounding bass that you can't ignore that easily, and that'll be sure to pull the attention on your dubstep drop. Alright, thanks for listening guys, have a good one of whatever you're having, and I'll see you in the next one.